No one warns you that the woman who makes you laugh every single day can still be someone you don't actually know. I didn't figure that out in one clean moment. It came at me sideways. In pieces I kept finding reasons to excuse, because I was 62 years old, twice widowed of bad relationships in my youth, and for the first time since my 30s I was foolishly, embarrassingly happy. Her name was Renata, and for 16 months I thought she was the last good thing life still owed me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you just finding your way here, my name is Walter Ashcombe. I spent 39 years building custom furniture out of a workshop in Asheville, North Carolina, the same workshop my own father ran before me, and his father before that. 3 generations of Ashcombe men have put their hands on the same lathes, sanded the same grain of Appalachian oak, and delivered finished pieces to families who then passed them down to their own children. It's not a big business. It was never supposed to be. But it's mine, and it's honest, and around here that still counts for something. My late wife, Margaret, passed 11 years ago. Cancer, quick and cruel, the way it sometimes is. We raised 2 children in the house up on Sunset Ridge, and Sunday dinners are still sacred in this family. My son Michael and his wife drive in from Hendersonville. My daughter Claire brings her twins, and my younger brother Rowan shows up whenever he pleases because in our family, showing up whenever you please is simply understood as belonging. We're loud. We argue about football and we pray before we eat. And nobody in this family has ever done anything by half measures. So when I tell you I met Renata at a furniture trade show in Charlotte, and that within 4 months I was completely gone for this woman, I need you to understand what that means coming from a man like me. I don't fall easily. I hadn't so much as dated seriously in the 9 years since Margaret died. I'd convinced myself that part of my life had simply closed, quietly, the way a shop closes for the winter. Renata walked into that convention hall in a green dress and asked me an intelligent question about dovetail joints, and something in me that had been asleep for almost a decade woke back up. I need you to understand this about Renata before anything else. She wasn't cold. She wasn't guarded in any way I could see. She was warm, funny, endlessly curious about my work, and she made me feel, every single day, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be at this stage of my life. So when the subject of her family came up, and it came up early, because in my world family comes up early, her answer didn't strike me as a warning sign. It struck me as a wound. My parents and I don't speak. She told me one evening, about 2 months in, sitting across from me at the little table in her condo in Biltmore Park, the takeout containers still on the counter behind us. They were hard people, cold, my father especially. I had to put real distance between us, just to become who I am. I looked at her. She wasn't performing. Her eyes had that fixed, tired quality of someone recalling something long since processed, but never fully healed. "I'm sorry," I said. "What else can you say?" "It's fine. It's just not something I talk about much. They won't be at the wedding. I need you to be okay with that." I told her I was, and I meant it because I trusted her, because she'd given me no reason not to. What I hadn't accounted for was my own family. Not that they were hostile toward Renata. They adored her, every one of them. But the Ashcombes operate on a particular frequency, and that frequency includes a deep need to know the people connected to the people we love. It isn't nosiness. It isn't judgment. We simply believe you understand a person better once you know where they came from, who raised them, whose table they sat at as a child. And by month 12 of our engagement, the silence around Renata's family had started making its own kind of noise. It came to a head on a Sunday evening in late spring. Claire had made her mother's pot roast, the real recipe, the one that takes all Saturday to do right, and we were all gathered around my kitchen table, myself, Renata, Michael and his wife, Claire and the twins, and my brother Rowan, who has never once in his life needed an invitation to show up at my door. Everything was moving along fine, until Rowan, operating as always without a shred of regard for social tact, set down his fork and looked straight at Renata. "Renata, honey, I gotta ask you something." She smiled. "Sure, Rowan. Where's your people?" The table went quiet the way a room goes quiet when somebody finally says the thing everyone's been carefully stepping around. Renata's smile stayed put, but her eyes shifted, just slightly. I've mentioned my parents and I don't have contact. I know you mentioned it. I'm asking about it. Rowan wasn't being cruel. He was being Rowan. Because in our family, and I say this with love, you don't marry into a family you've never met. It isn't how we do things. Rowan. My voice. One low word. He picked his fork back up. But the question was already on the table, and no amount of pot roast was going to bury it. Later, after Renata had gone home, my brother found me in the kitchen. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and leaned against the counter. She's a good woman, he said. Not a question. She is. I believe her. He nodded slowly. But Walt, we're going to stand up in a church. We're going to make promises in front of God and every person we know, and we're going to do it without ever laying eyes on a single member of her family. Her parents were hard on her. I believe that. He set the glass down. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to know what you're walking into. I didn't say anything. He clapped my shoulder and went back to the living room. I stood in that kitchen a long time. But here's what I need you to understand. I still wasn't suspicious. Not of Renata, not really. If anything, I was worried about myself. Because the thought that kept circling back on the drive home to Biltmore Park was this: what if her parents look at me and decide I'm not what they wanted for their daughter? I know how that sounds, coming from a man who's run his own business for 4 decades and comes from a family like mine. But Renata moved in circles I didn't fully understand. Regional sales conferences, a downtown loft, friends who talked about wine regions and investment portfolios. She dressed with a kind of polish that I found appealing, but that occasionally, quietly, made me feel like I was too plain, too much sawdust and flannel, too country for the room. What if her parents were the same? What if they had money, standards, expectations I had no idea about? What if they looked at me and Renata saw everything through their eyes and something shifted? That was my real fear, driving north on I-26 that Saturday morning in June. Not that I was about to uncover a lie. Not that anything was wrong. I thought I was about to meet people who might find me intimidating, who might not think I measured up. I was going to introduce myself, take whatever they gave me, and try to convince them I was the man their daughter had chosen. Honestly, I believed I was the underdog in this story. Finding her parents hadn't required a private investigator, just a dull, routine piece of paperwork. Renata had moved into a loft downtown that my son's law firm managed the leasing paperwork for, since Michael handled property closings on the side, and as part of the final title transfer before the wedding, the documents needed her legal signature. Michael brought the folder by my shop on a Friday afternoon. I glanced down at the official ID she'd uploaded to the portal. Renata Marie Colby, not Renata Sinclair, the name she used with our friends and on her social pages. Colby. Out of pure curiosity, I ran a quick property search under that name. A few clicks turned up an old public record, a dormant social media profile untouched since college, and a home address on Persimmon Lane in a little town called Fenwick Hollow, about 2 hours west. That Saturday morning I told Renata I had a delivery to make to a client out past the mountains. She kissed me goodbye without looking up from her laptop. On the drive, I ran through introductions in my head, quietly dreading the moment someone opened that door and looked at me like I wasn't what they'd pictured. I came off the highway into Fenwick Hollow just before 10 in the morning. I followed the GPS into a neighborhood of modest little houses, clean streets, American flags on the porches, the kind of place where people know their neighbors by name and wave from their front steps. I slowed down. There it was. A tidy clapboard house with a flower bed running along the walkway and wind chimes on the porch. In the front yard, moving slow with a garden hose, was an older man in a faded Atlanta Braves t-shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watering the flower bed with the unhurried patience of a man who had nowhere else in the world he needed to be. This wasn't what I'd pictured. I sat in that truck a full 5 minutes, recalibrating everything. No gate, no fancy car in the driveway. Nothing about this place suggested the people inside had spent one single moment wondering whether anyone else was good enough for anything. These weren't intimidating people. These were plain, ordinary people. And for one unmistakable moment, I felt real relief. I got out and walked up the path. He caught sight of me when I was about 10 feet off and narrowed his eyes with that careful look folks get when a stranger comes toward their house. Can I help you with something? I stopped, took a breath. Sir, you don't know me. My name is Walter Ashcombe. I'm engaged to your daughter, Renata. Harold Colby dropped the hose. Not fumbled it, just let it go. Water ran slow across the driveway while he stared at me, and his face did something I was not the least bit prepared for. It broke. Not with anger, not with suspicion. With relief. 2 years of built-up grief finally finding somewhere to land. Dorothy, his voice cracked on her name. Dorothy, come out here. And in that instant, standing on a porch in Fenwick Hollow, watching a retired mill foreman try to hold himself together, my whole understanding of this situation turned over completely. Inside the Colby house, everything I thought I knew about Renata began quietly coming apart, over coffee I hadn't asked for, and a plate of shortbread Dorothy brought out with trembling hands. The house was clean and modest and completely full of Renata. School pictures, birthday photos, a prom picture on the mantel, a college graduation portrait where Harold and Dorothy stood on either side of her, beaming, Harold's arm around her shoulders, Dorothy's face so proud it was almost painful to look at. These weren't the faces of cold, controlling people. These were the faces of parents who missed their daughter terribly. The story came out slow. Harold had worked the floor at the cotton mill for 32 years before it closed, then took a job managing the hardware store in town until he retired. Dorothy had been the church secretary at First Baptist for most of Renata's childhood. They'd helped put her through Appalachian State no debt, paid for out of a savings account they'd built dollar by dollar since she was born, because they wanted her to have that, free and clear. They were proud of it, deeply proud. When Renata moved to Charlotte and started building her career, things shifted slowly. Calls got shorter, visits stopped. She started appearing in photographs online under a different last name, Sinclair, which turned out to be her middle name, at events with people Harold and Dorothy didn't recognize, wearing a version of herself they no longer fully knew. Then came the wedding conversation, the request for $80,000. Harold's counter, heavy with disappointment, was $12,000 everything they could give without gutting their retirement. Renata's response was that if they couldn't invest in her future, they weren't part of it, blocked that same night. Dorothy slid something across the table, a sealed birthday card, never opened, stamped return to sender in red. Renata's handwriting on the return address label. Our address. I sat there staring at that red stamp, and then I slowly pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the text Renata had sent me the night before, the one I'd read right before I fell asleep, the one that had put me on this road in the first place. Sweetheart, wonderful news. I reached out to my parents. They finally apologize for everything and want to have lunch with you before they head out of town. I'm so excited for you to finally meet them. The kitchen went very quiet. I looked up slowly. Harold and Dorothy Colby were sitting right across from me, completely unaware of the digital reality their daughter was constructing in real time. I turned the phone around and showed them the screen. Dorothy read it. She set the phone down gently and said nothing. Harold looked out the kitchen window toward the flower bed he'd been watering when I pulled up. I thought about the drive out, my rehearsed introductions, my quiet fear of not measuring up to these people. I almost laughed. I almost laughed because I'd spent weeks worried Renata's parents would look down on me, that they'd be too refined, too demanding. And here they were in Fenwick Hollow, in a clapboard house on Persimmon Lane, with wind chimes and a garden hose and 2 years of unopened birthday cards. The person who decided somebody wasn't good enough had never been them. It had been her. It had always been her. And just like that, the man who'd driven out on I-26 nervous about making a good impression, that man was gone. The man who drove back to Asheville that afternoon was thinking about something else entirely. The difference between a good liar and a great one is that a great one never breaks character, not even at the table, not even while everything around them is falling apart. I didn't confront her that night. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I got back to our building a little after 2, sat in my truck for a full 10 minutes, and made a very deliberate decision. Not yet. Not because I was scared. Not because I doubted what I'd just seen and heard in that kitchen, but because I'm my father's son, and my father taught me something about timing before a confrontation that most people get wrong. He used to say, Walt, the man who reacts first almost never wins. Let them finish the lie. A half-told lie is just an argument. A fully told lie is a confession. I rode the elevator up and stood outside the door a moment. I could hear Renata inside, moving to the low sound of the television. Completely unbothered, completely unaware. I put my key in the lock and went in. She was on the couch, with a glass of white wine and her laptop open to some venue's website. She looked up and smiled the way she always did, warm, easy, like I was the best part of her day. How'd the delivery run go? Went fine. Long drive, though. You look tired. Want me to order something? What I wanted was for her to explain why her mother's unopened birthday card was sitting in a drawer in Fenwick Hollow, with our return address stamped on it in red. That's what I wanted. Sure, I said. Whatever sounds good to you. I sat beside her. She rested her head on my shoulder for a moment and went back to scrolling venue photos. I looked at the screen and saw nothing. On the outside, completely normal. On the inside, I was taking the whole thing apart, piece by piece. That night, I lay awake and did what I do when I'm working through something complicated in the shop, separate what I know from what I assume, and lay out a timeline. As far as I knew, Renata's real name was Colby. Her parents were Harold and Dorothy of Fenwick Hollow, alive, present, and heartbroken. They hadn't mistreated her, hadn't been controlling or cold in any way that matched what she'd told me. They'd offered $12,000 toward the wedding, been told it wasn't enough, and been erased from her life that same night. As far as I knew, Renata had texted me while sitting in her parents' own kitchen, telling me those same parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch, which meant she was already building the next floor of the lie, which meant there was a next floor, which meant somebody was going to be standing on it at that lunch. Who? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Over the next 3 days, I paid attention differently. Not suspiciously, I was careful about that. I didn't check her phone. I didn't follow her. I just listened. The way you listen, once you finally understand every conversation, has been running on 2 levels the whole time, and you'd only ever been hearing one of them. I noticed she mentioned her boss more than usual, a man named Gordon Halstead. Gordon thinks the Reeves account might close early. Casual mentions of his wife, Priscilla, who'd apparently also been at the same charity gala where we first met. Small mentions, nothing alarming, the kind of thing a person drops into conversation when they're trying to get someone comfortable with a name before that name matters. She was getting me used to them. She'd been doing it for weeks, and I'd never once noticed. Gordon Halstead. I looked him up from my office the following Tuesday. Door shut. Senior partner at Renata's marketing firm downtown. His photo on the company site showed a silver-haired man in his late 50s, with that particular ease that only comes from decades of never having to justify himself anywhere. His wife, Priscilla, turned up in a society column covering a charity gala in Charlotte 2 years back. Polished hair, tasteful jewelry, the full picture. A wealthy, respectable couple. Exactly the kind of people you'd want at your side if you were trying to convince a close-knit mountain family that you came from somewhere impressive. I leaned back in my chair and stared at their corporate headshots. That's when it hit me. Renata wasn't just a liar. She was trapped inside a prison built entirely of her own insecurity. She'd spent a decade reinventing herself in Charlotte, sanding down her identity to climb a social ladder that meant nothing to my family but apparently meant everything to the people she worked with. When her father wouldn't sacrifice his retirement for 1 day of theater, it wasn't just a financial disagreement to her. In her mind, her parents' modesty was a threat to the polished illusion of success she'd sacrificed years to build. To keep that lie alive, she hadn't simply drifted from them. She'd had to erase them completely. And then I thought about what she must have told the Halsteads to get them to agree to this, because here's what I know about people like Gordon and Priscilla Halstead. They don't get where they are by being careless. For Renata to talk them into sitting down at a lunch and playing her parents, she had to give them something that made sense. A story coherent enough, sympathetic enough, that 2 busy, important people would say yes without asking too many questions. What had she told them? I let it sit 2 days. Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a reminder Renata had added to our shared calendar. Lunch, Gordon, and Priscilla, at the Grove Park Terrace. Saturday, 12:30 p.m. She'd added a note underneath. Can't wait for you to finally meet them, honey. This means everything to me. I stared at that note a long while. Means everything to me. I thought about Dorothy Colby pressing a sealed birthday card across her kitchen table. I thought about Harold's face reading that text over my shoulder. Yeah, I bet it does. That same Thursday I called my father. I should say, I called Rowan, since our father passed some years back. But Rowan's always been the one who steps into that role when it matters. I told him I needed to talk. Come by the house. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at my own kitchen table in Sunset Ridge, the same table where Renata had charmed my daughter, where Rowan had asked his question, where everything had seemed completely normal 2 weeks earlier. And I laid it all out, every bit of it. Fenwick Hollow, Harold and Dorothy, the birthday card, the text, Gordon and Priscilla Halstead. Rowan sat across from me with his hands folded and listened without interrupting once. When I finished, the kitchen went quiet a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" 4 words. That's all. No lecture, no dramatic reaction. I need to build something bigger than this. Rowan nodded slowly. The Colbys? I'm going back out to Fenwick Hollow after the lunch. I want to know if they're willing to be part of what comes next. He looked at me steady. And what comes next? A dinner, I said. A real one, with the right people in the room. Another pause. Then Rowan stood, straightened his jacket, and said, I'll talk to Claire about the restaurant. That was the whole conversation. Claire's reaction was a little less contained. She came in from the living room, where apparently she'd been listening to the entire thing, which in our family isn't considered eavesdropping, it's just considered being present. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and a look on her face I can only describe as the specific fury of a daughter who watched somebody eat her mother's pot roast recipe and then lie to her father's face. Dad, Renata ate at my table, in my house. Her mother's out in Fenwick Hollow with a birthday card that got sent back unopened. I know, sweetheart. She looked at me a long time. Then she crossed the room and put both hands on my face, the same move she's made since she was 4 years old, and wanted my full attention. You're going to fix it, she said quietly. Not just for you. For them too. Saturday came. Grove Park Terrace is the kind of place where the lighting's built specifically to make everybody look a little more important than they actually are. Renata had made the reservation. As you'd expect, I arrived 5 minutes early and took a seat facing the door. They came in together, Renata in the middle, her arm laced through Gordon Halstead's, Priscilla on her other side. Renata was glowing. Gordon carried himself with the ease of a man who'd never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. Priscilla was all polite smiles and careful posture. I stood when they reached the table. Big smile, firm handshake. Mom, Dad, Renata said, her voice colored with a particular kind of triumph. This is Gordon and Priscilla. Gordon, Priscilla. Not Harold. Not Dorothy. I shook both their hands. I've heard so much about you two. I hadn't because they hadn't existed in this role until about a week earlier. We sat, opened menus, and for the next 20 minutes I watched Renata perform with a fluency that, under any other circumstance, I'd have genuinely admired. She laughed at Gordon's remarks half a second too quick. She referenced shared memories with Priscilla. Trips, restaurants, family moments got mentioned, and Priscilla followed along carefully, the way someone does when they're working from a script they only half know by heart. Gordon was smoother. He asked me about the furniture business, made a few sharp comments about the housing market, generally carried himself like a man who'd done his homework and meant to be convincing. Everybody at that table was acting. The whole thing was a stage, and I sat there eating grilled trout, being perfectly pleasant. So, Gordon, I said, setting my fork down with the easy calm of a man without a worry in the world. Renata's told me a lot about you. Sounds like you two have been an important presence in her life. Gordon smiled. She's been like family to us. Like family. That's something. Means a great deal to us, I said. I looked at Renata when I said it. She gave me that glowing smile back. Keep smiling, sweetheart. I'll be straight with you both, I went on, leaning in slightly, the way I do in a negotiation when I want somebody to feel like I'm letting them in on something. My family takes formal occasions seriously. My father, God rest him, would never forgive me if we didn't do this right. I paused. We'd love to host an engagement dinner next Saturday. Nothing extravagant. Family, good food, a toast. My family just needs to welcome the people who matter to Renata before we get to the altar. Gordon glanced at Priscilla. Half a second of silent calculation. We'd be honored. Renata grabbed my hand under the table so fast I felt it in my shoulder. Perfect, I said, and smiled at her. She smiled back, full, radiant, triumphant, the smile of a woman who believes she's already won. The trap was already built. She'd just walked into it smiling. Over the following 6 days, I moved carefully and quietly. Monday, I drove back to Fenwick Hollow. I called Harold from the driveway before I even knocked. He opened the door before I finished knocking. We sat in that same kitchen, same coffee, same table. I told them about the lunch, about Gordon and Priscilla Halstead, about the performance, about the engagement dinner I'd arranged. I told them I wanted them there. Dorothy's hands went still around her mug. Walter, we don't want to cause a scene. Dorothy. I looked at her straight. My family is going to stand in a church and welcome whoever walks through those doors into our family. She deserves to know who she really is. I paused. And you've spent 2 years sending birthday cards that keep coming back unopened. You deserve to be in that room. Not for drama. Because you're her parents, and somebody has to say it out loud. Harold leaned over and put his hand over Dorothy's. He looked at me. What time should we be there? Tuesday, I sat with Rowan and Claire at my kitchen table and walked them through the whole plan in detail. Rowan listened, asked 2 sharp questions, then said, I'll handle the restaurant. He picked up his phone and that was that. Claire's reaction required immediate managing. I want to say something to her at the door, she said, jaw tight. No, Claire. Not one word. I told her, hands on both her shoulders. I need you to do something that's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Not one word until I stand up for the toast. She looked at the ceiling, then at Rowan, who was biting the inside of his cheek, trying not to laugh. Fine, Claire finally hissed. But I want a double helping of that pot roast before anybody sits down, and I'm holding the door on the way out. I looked at her and nodded. That I can arrange. Every piece was in place. The Peregrine Room, a private dining space at a restaurant just off Biltmore Avenue, was Rowan's choice, and it was a good one, the kind of place that feels like somebody's home instead of a stage set. White linens, candles, warm low light. Claire handled the menu herself and slid a small framed photo of my late wife onto the welcome table because, in her words, Mom needed to be there too. Harold and Dorothy Colby drove in from Fenwick Hollow that Saturday morning and checked into a motel just outside town. Harold called me Thursday night to confirm. His voice was steady and careful, and at the end of the call, after we'd gone over the details, he said quietly, Walter, whatever happens tomorrow in that room, thank you for driving out to Fenwick Hollow, for knocking on that door. He paused. She chose well, even if she doesn't know it yet. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told him, I'll see you tomorrow, Harold. I pressed my suit Friday night. I climbed into bed next to Renata, who was already asleep, already dreaming, I imagine, of the version of tomorrow she'd built in her head. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling and thought about a man in a faded Braves t-shirt watering a flower bed on Persimmon Lane, a sealed birthday card stamped red on the front, a kitchen table where 2 people had been quietly waiting 2 years for someone to finally show up. Somebody was showing up tomorrow. Both of them were. You can build a lie as tall as you want, but the moment the right people walk through the door, the whole thing comes down. I woke that Saturday morning with a stillness that doesn't come from peace. It comes from certainty. I lay there a few minutes listening to Renata in the bathroom, the shower, the hair dryer, the particular rhythm of a woman getting ready for a performance she believes she's already won. And I thought about Harold Colby pressing his good navy jacket in a motel room in Fenwick Hollow, Dorothy standing in front of a mirror trying to hold herself together. 2 people who'd driven 2 hours to attend a dinner their own daughter had no idea they'd been invited to. Get up, Walt. Let's finish this. Renata took 3 hours to get ready. 3 hours. I sat in the living room watching the golf highlights with the volume low and let her have every minute of it. She came out twice to ask my opinion. Once about earrings, once about shoes, and both times I told her she looked beautiful because she did. That was never the problem. The problem was everything underneath the beauty. She wanted to leave early to check the venue setup. I told her to go on ahead, that I had a quick call to make, and I'd meet her there. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coat, and walked out that door like everything in her life was perfectly arranged. The second it shut, I picked up my phone and called Harold. He answered on the first ring. "You all right?" I asked. "We're ready." His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd made peace with a decision. "Dorothy's dressed. We're ready. Good. When I text you, you come in. Doesn't matter what's happening at that table. You just walk in and stand there. You don't have to say a single word." A pause. "Walter, yeah, she's going to see you the second that door opens. I know. I just want you ready for it. I've been ready 2 years. Been ready since the night she blocked us. Been ready every birthday when the phone never rang." Another pause, shorter. "We'll be there." I held the phone a second after he hung up. Then I put my jacket on, checked the ring in the inside pocket, and walked out the door. The Peregrine Room on a Saturday evening was exactly what it should be. Warm, welcoming, garlic and rosemary drifting out to greet you at the entrance like an old friend. But the private room in back ran on a different frequency altogether. Quieter, deliberate, white linens, low candlelight, round tables arranged so everybody could see everybody else. Claire had been there since 4 that afternoon. When I walked in at 6:30, she was adjusting the centerpiece flowers with the focused energy of a woman who understands the details of a room tell people exactly how seriously you're taking them. She looked up when I came in and studied my face the way she's done since she was old enough to have something to hide. "You okay?" "I'm okay, sweetheart." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She crossed the room and put both hands on my face, staring at me a long moment. "Your mother," she said quietly, "used to say the truth always finds the most uncomfortable seat in the room, even when nobody invites it." She smoothed my collar. "Let it sit tonight." I nearly lost it right there. Nearly. Rowan was near the bar, talking with Michael, already in his charcoal suit, completely composed. He looked over at me as I approached. One slow nod. That nod said, "Everything's ready. The room is set. Do what you need to do." Claire's twins were seated at a side table with a plate piled high with rolls, and Claire herself was pacing near the door, the focused expression of a woman honoring a solemn obligation. They arrived at 7. I heard Renata's laugh in the hallway before the door even opened, that particular social laugh of hers, half a note higher than her real one, the one she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party before she's even walked into it. She came in first. Navy dress, hair perfect, every detail in place. Gordon Halstead followed. Silver-haired, expensive suit, moving with the natural authority of a man who's never once doubted his right to be anywhere. Priscilla beside him, elegant and refined, pearls at her collarbone. Renata moved through that room like she owned it. She kissed Claire on both cheeks. She shook my hand with both of hers. She laughed at something Priscilla said near the drinks table and touched her arm warmly. She was magnificent, genuinely, terrifyingly magnificent. When she reached my side, she looped her arm through mine and leaned in close. "This is perfect," she whispered. "Your family is wonderful. This is everything I wanted." "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." She heard a compliment. I meant something else entirely. We sat. The food came. Roasted salmon, lamb chops, a spread Claire had planned down to the last detail, fresh bread arriving warm in a cloth-lined basket. The table filled with the easy noise of a real family dinner. Gordon was gracious and attentive, asking Michael about his firm with what looked like genuine interest. Priscilla complimented Claire's choice of restaurant, and Claire accepted the compliment kindly, while privately thinking things she'd probably never fully say out loud. Renata was glowing, relaxed, victorious. I ate, I laughed in the right places. I refilled glasses, asked questions, and to anyone watching, I was a perfectly relaxed man, enjoying a family dinner. My phone sat face down in my jacket pocket. I had one text left to send. I was waiting for the right moment. That moment came at 7:48. in the small lull between the main course and whatever was supposed to come next. The table was warm, the wine was flowing, and Renata was laughing at something Gordon had said. I pulled out my phone and typed one word to Harold. Then I stood and tapped my knife against my glass, that clean, clear sound that tells a room, stop, listen. The table went still. Renata looked up at me with that full, radiant smile, the smile of a woman who thinks the next 60 seconds are going to be a toast about how much I love her. I let the silence stretch a beat longer than felt comfortable. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. My voice was calm, unhurried, the way my father used to talk when something really mattered in this family. A dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a statement. It's us saying, these people are real. These people matter. We don't say that lightly. I looked slowly around the table. My father taught me that the people you choose to bring into a room tell you exactly who you are. I paused. So I want to make sure we've got the right people at this table tonight. I looked toward the restaurant manager standing near the back wall. He'd been briefed. He knew his cue. He walked to the side door and opened it. And then Harold and Dorothy Colby walked in. Harold in his navy jacket, the one that didn't quite fit like it used to, the kind you could tell he'd had for years and kept for occasions that mattered. Dorothy in a burgundy dress, a small purse held tight in both hands, chin up, moving with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd decided she wasn't going to fall apart in public, whatever happened next. They crossed that threshold into the silence of the room, and Renata saw them. I was watching her face. I'd positioned myself specifically to watch her face. The color drained out of it, like a tide, pulling back fast, complete, absolute. Her lips parted. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, went completely still. The glass tipped. I reached over without looking and steadied it. Set it down gently on the linen. She turned to me. Her eyes were doing the rapid math of somebody searching for the story that saves them. I could see it happening in real time, hunting for the exit, the angle, whatever version of this she could still control. Walter, her voice came out thin, barely there. I drove to Fenwick Hollow, I said quietly, not loud, not performing for the room. 3 weeks ago, I got in the truck on a Saturday morning because I told myself, maybe I could fix this for her. Maybe I could give her family back as a wedding gift. I let that land. I found a man watering his garden on Persimmon Lane in an old Braves t-shirt. I told him my name and he dropped the hose. The air in the room had gone tight and thin. Renata, your father worked the mill floor for 32 years, then ran the hardware store in town until he retired. Your mother was the church secretary for most of your childhood. They put you through college with no debt, because they wanted you to have that free and clear. My voice stayed even, steady. They offered you $12,000 from their retirement, and you told them if they couldn't fund your life, they didn't exist in it. She opened her mouth. You don't understand everything that happened when I sat in their kitchen. I said it quietly, like a door closing. I saw your school pictures on the refrigerator. I held the birthday card you mailed to our own address, unopened. And while I sat there, you texted me, telling me your parents had apologized and wanted to have lunch with me. I turned to Gordon and Priscilla Halstead. Priscilla had both hands flat on the table in front of her, her face gone completely pale. Gordon had gone still as stone. Gordon, Priscilla, I said, my voice shifting to something calm and respectful. I know exactly what she told you, that my family was deeply prejudiced, that her biological parents had passed away years ago, and she asked you to play the role of honorary family mentors so she wouldn't have to face a formal wedding alone. She used your kindness, your standing, as a tool to fill 2 empty chairs in a play she'd written. I gestured toward Harold and Dorothy, still standing near the door. But these are her real parents. Priscilla looked at Renata, a long, slow look, the kind that doesn't need words because words wouldn't be enough anyway. Then she looked at Harold and Dorothy, and something crossed her face that was far worse than anger. It was recognition, the specific recognition of a woman who'd just understood the person she thought she knew didn't exist. Gordon didn't say a word. He folded his napkin, set it on the table, the gesture of a man leaving who's decided there's nothing left worth saying. I turned back to Renata one last time. She'd stopped searching for the exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. She just looked at me, eyes bright, jaw tight. Every floor of everything she'd built was reflected back at her in every face in that room. I grew up watching my father treat everybody like they mattered. The man who delivered the wood, the woman who swept the shop floor, the retired mill worker from Fenwick Hollow who gave everything and got told it wasn't enough. I reached into my jacket pocket. That's the measure I was raised on. Not the address, not the job title, not the clothes. I looked at her. By that measure, I don't know who you are. I pulled the ring out of my pocket. I set it on the white linen in front of her. It wasn't thrown. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply placed, quietly, the way you set something down when you've carried it too long and you're finally ready to let it go for good. Then I picked up the small bouquet of white roses sitting at the center of our table, my daughter's choice, simple. My late wife would have liked them, and crossed the room to where Dorothy Colby was standing. She was fighting it. You could see the effort in her jaw, in her shoulders, in the short, careful way she was breathing, the way people breathe when they're holding something enormous and can't afford to let it drop in public. I offered her the flowers. She looked at them, looked at me, and then finally let herself fall apart, completely, right there. Not a scream, a whisper of a sound, the kind that comes after 2 years of accumulated grief finally finding somewhere to go. Harold pulled her into his arms before she could hear the first sound. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet, chin firm. He drew her close and looked at me over her head. Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He stepped forward. One step. Dorothy still tucked under his arm. He held his free hand out to me. I shook it. He gripped it hard, the grip of a man saying something his voice still couldn't quite manage. I held it a moment, then stepped back. Rowan was beside me. I don't know exactly when he'd moved. My brother shows up when it counts. That's just what he does. He looked at Harold Colby a moment. Then he stepped forward and put his hand out. "I'm Rowan," he said. "I should have met you a long time ago. I'm sorry." Harold shook his hand and swallowed once. "Harold." A breath. "Thank you for raising a man like this." Rowan glanced at me sideways. Just for a second. Just long enough. In 30 years, I'd never seen him look that proud. Claire didn't shake Dorothy's hand. She pulled her into a full embrace, both arms, immediate, unconditional, the way she's hugged people who needed holding, since she was a little girl watching her mother do the same thing. Dorothy held on. The flowers were still in her hands. We walked out together, my family and the Colbys. Claire's arm laced through Dorothy's. Rowan and Harold walked side by side with the easy quiet of two men who'd just recognized something worthwhile in each other. Michael held doors. The twins trailed behind, wide-eyed, sensing something enormous had just happened without fully understanding what. Claire stopped at the front door. She only looked back once. I looked back too. Renata was sitting at the center of that table in her perfect dress, in her perfectly constructed life, the ring on the linen in front of her, the flowers gone. Gordon and Priscilla Halstead were standing at the back of the room. Priscilla already had her coat on, Gordon's hand at the small of her back, neither one looking at Renata as they made their way toward the exit. Her friends, whatever circle she'd built and performed for and constructed her second life around, sat frozen in their chairs, with the particular discomfort of people who've just witnessed something they can't unsee and don't know what to do with their hands. Nobody went to her. Nobody pulled her aside. Nobody offered a version of the story that made her look better. Nobody played the part she needed, because there were no parts left to play. The entire cast had walked out. She just sat there, seen for the first time, finally, irreversibly. Outside, on the sidewalk, the June air was warm and clean, and downtown Asheville moved around us like it had no idea what had just happened inside that restaurant. I stood next to Rowan and took a deep breath. He put his hand on the back of my neck, something he's done since I was a boy. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Dad would have done the exact same thing. That was it. That was all he said. Across the sidewalk, Harold Colby was looking out at the mountains with Dorothy tucked under his arm, the white roses still in her hands. Both of them breathing that same clean evening air like people who'd just been handed back something they'd stopped believing they'd ever see again. Harold caught me looking. He nodded once, not a thank you, Something there isn't quite a word for. I nodded back. Some deals you close for profit. Some you close because there's no version of yourself you could live with that walks away from that table. That night, I closed the most important deal of my life, and I didn't make a dime. Some people lie to erase the very ones who loved them best. She built an entire life on that eraser. And on a warm Saturday evening in June, in the back room of a restaurant in downtown Asheville, every single floor of it came down. If this story moved you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every one of them. I'll see you in the next one, friend.